Hey guys, it's Galactic Glum and welcome to another episode of the RPG tutorial series. So today we're going to be working on our stats or attribute system. Basically, we're going to be making a health and mana bar and then having it actually animate, if you will. Now, today's tutorial will only focus on the basics, and then in later tutorials we'll focus on more complicated things like lerping and making it look nicer and stuff like that. Alright, so let's get right into this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our game folder here, and then our scripts, and we're just going to create a new folder called core. This is going to store all our core RPG stuff. You can name this whatever you want. I'm just going to put everything in here. And then let's make a new C# script called attribute. So this is not going to be a mono behavior, okay? And obviously, Visual Studio. If you ever have this problem with Visual Studio says it's a miscellaneous file. Very simple fix. Just go back into Visual Studio, press show all files, and then find the file you want to add. Right click, include in project. It's somewhat tedious if it happens a lot, but usually it doesn't happen a lot. And you'll see me actually making files from Visual Studio because Unity allows you to do that with the Unity tools. Anyways, so what is our attribute going to be? Well, it's actually going to be a type of scriptable object. So it's not going to be a mono behavior. It's going to be like a mono behavior, but it's not going to be a component. It doesn't attach to a game object. Rather, it just stores data. It's going to contain one method for manipulating that data, but it's really only going to store things, and it exists in Unity space, but not in game space, if you will. It can be in game space in the sense that you can pass around this attribute while the game is running, but you can actually make attributes or scriptable objects, whatever, in the editor and modify them. And they're sort of like if you had a different type of asset file, right? Like a sprite, you know how they have an inspector? Well, now an attribute is going to have a custom inspector where we can modify its values. So we need to basically allow us to make this first. So Unity has this nice attribute called create asset menu. So we'll just pass it in a file name, and the file name is going to be, well, it'll just be attribute. This is basically just the file name that is used when you create it. And then we'll have another one called menu name, and this is actually where it's going to be stored in the create menu. I'll just do RPG/attribute, right? So you can actually see now that if we go into our project here, I'll just go here, I'll right click, create RPG attribute, and you see nothing shows up yet though. So let's do that now. So in our attribute, we're gonna have a few values. We're first gonna have a serialized field string name. We'll also have a integer minimum value. And we'll have a maximum value. So this is the upper and lower and upper bound. Okay. It's gonna be useful because you, for instance, don't want health to go below 0. You know, and we do want to be notified when it goes 0, and you'll see how we do that. We're gonna have another integer as well. It's gonna be private, and this will just be our current value. I'll just name it value. So now, if you go in here, you'll see that we can actually modify our name, minimum, and maximum value. So I'll just make this health. Our minimum value was 0, maximum was 100, and yeah, I'll just rename this to health attribute. I'll also drag this into the game folder, and I'll make a new folder inside game called data, and I'll drag health attribute into data. There you go. So now you can see we have a health attribute file. Right, so we actually need to be able to access this because we're going to be passing this data around, so we can't just make it private. You could just make it a public and get rid of this stuff, because you could just do public string name like this. But I like properties, so what I'll be doing instead is I'll have this name, and then I'm going to just do get return name like that. Space that out. I just like it. It's more of a preference. If you want to do it a different way, go ahead. We'll also have a integer minimum value, which will obviously return the minimum value, and then we'll have another integer maximum value. I'll just paste that and there you go. So that's name, minimum, and maximum value. We also probably want to be able to get our value. So public int value. And I'll just copy that and paste value into there. So now we can get all our methods. And in fact, really, I'll do this one for value. Since value isn't a serialized field, which means we're not setting it anytime, what we can do is just make this a get private set. So we can make it an auto property. I believe that's what it's called. But yeah, we'll just do get private set there. Okay, so now we'll have a method. We'll have two methods. So we first need an initialize method. And this method basically just initializes whatever values we need. And the only value we really need to initialize here is our value. And we need to set it to our maximum value because we want it to start off at maximum. Alternatively, you could make a field called starting value and then set it there, but I'm just going to say it defaults to maximum value. You could even have, yeah, we could put a boolean here. So we could do serialized field, private, bool, default to maximum value. And by default, that'd be equal to true, and then we'll say if default to maximum value is equal to false, then just return out of here. So do not set that, basically. Now you can see here, if you really don't want your health attribute to default to maximum value, just, yeah, you can just uncheck that. But I will keep it checked. Okay, the other method we're gonna have is a modify method. And this is gonna take in a int value, or you can call it anything, but I'm just gonna call it by value. You can call it value by value, same thing. And then we're gonna add to our value by value. So this way, you can modify and you could do like -50 to subtract 50 or whatever, though you cannot multiply it. You could just do another method called multiply. It's not that big of a deal though. You could even do a set, so you could set the value if you actually want to just set it anywhere. It doesn't really matter though. The next thing we need to do is clamp our value. So this is very important because we don't want it to go below or above the caps we set. So we don't want it to go below maximum, or we don't want it to go above maximum, and we don't want it to go below minimum. So we need to set that here. So the first one it takes in is value. So we're just gonna pass in our value. Then we're gonna pass in our minimum, and then we're gonna pass in our maximum to mathf.clamp, and we're setting that return result of mathf.clamp to value. Okay. And the last thing we need to do is make an event here. So let's create a new class. It can be in the same file. That's what I typically do for events, though you could move it into its own file. So this is gonna be a class attribute event args, not event handler. We'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, we'll have a public class attribute event args, and this will inherit from event args. So you're gonna need to import system. So you're gonna need to use using system. I have resharper, so it does it for me, but just go to the top of your file and do using system, so you can get that. And then in here, we're only gonna have one thing. We're gonna have a public read-only attribute. Okay. Read-only just means it can only be set in the constructor. And then let's make constructor attribute event args, and we'll take in an attribute, and we'll set that. So the reason we're having an event args is because we're going to be using delegates, and delegates need to, well, at least the way we use it is we're going to need to pass in something and pass information around for the value changed, right? So the next thing we need to make up here is a delegate. A public delegate void attribute event value changed. Okay? Or actually, I'll rename this to, first of all, that's changed. I'll name it attribute value changed event handler. And this will take in an object sender, so you can use this to cast it to whatever you're expecting the value to be. It's just a common practice. It's a convention. When you're using delegates, you send in an object sender and then an event args. That's going to be the attribute event args, and we'll just call that args or something. So now we need to initialize this event handler in our attribute scriptable object. So just below all our public fields, just do a public event attribute value changed event handler, and you could just call that anything, but I'm going to call it value changed. And then we're going to have a private method just below the event. And this is going to be called on value change. So this is actually going to call our delegate. And notify any subscribers of this delegate that we have changed their value. So if value changed is equal to null, then we obviously don't want to do anything because then we're going to get a null reference exception, so just return. Otherwise, we're going to call value changed, and you can call it just like a function, because in a way it is just a function, but it has multiple people being notified that it was called. So that's the way delegates work. Though it's basically a function where multiple people subscribe into it, and then they do something with it. And we'll see how we do that in a little bit when we actually get to our UI portion of this. But in here we want to pass in our object, so just do this, and then we want to create a new attribute event args and just pass in us again. So this new attribute event args this, because we want to pass in our attribute where we've changed our own attribute, so we're the ones changing here. And then in modify we want to call on value changed. Alright, so that's the attribute class done for now. When we get into regeneration and stuff in later videos, we will come back to this. But for now, this is the attribute class done. The next thing we're going to make is something called an attribute container. So just create a new class, and you can do this in Unity. I'm just going to do it in Visual Studio. And in Visual Studio, you should have a C# model behavior template, which is really neat because it allows you to create stuff in Unity, or in Visual Studio, not in Unity. Just call this attribute container, okay? And this is not going to be a model behavior as well. What this is going to be is this is going to be a container for all our attributes. Sort of like a workspace, if you can imagine that. It's just so we can have a centralized area or central system to ask and manage attributes in a way. This is going to be a system serializable, so you're going to need to go up here and you're going to do using system, because we're going to need the serializable attribute right here. So it's going to be a serializable, which means we can actually modify it in the editor. Another thing is we're actually going to inherit from IEnumerator, or no, IEnumerable. And it's going to be the generic type, so it's IEnumerable attributes. So the reason we need to do this, or yeah, just use system collections.generic. So the reason we're doing this is because what this allows us to do, becoming an IEnumerable, or at least inheriting from it, you're not really becoming it, allows you to iterate over this attribute container or whatever instance like a list or an array. And you'll see how we use that in a little bit, but it's very useful. So just override or inherit these two methods right here. Public IEnumerable attribute getEnumerator, and IEnumerable IEnumerable.getEnumerator. So many enumerators. We'll be implementing these in a minute, so you could just do this. I have ReSharper, so it does it for me, which is really neat. But yeah, again, just stop the video and you can do that. Alright, so we're gonna have a private list of attributes, okay? And we'll just call this attributes, and we can initialize that. Remember, you have to flag this as serialized field because we actually want to modify this in the editor. So just flag that as a serialized field. We're going to make a method called Initialize. So what this will do is this is going to loop through every attribute in our list and just call attribute.initialize on it. Basically, we're initializing every attribute. That's what we're doing here. We're also going to make a new method called contains, okay? Attribute, and just return attributes dot contains attribute. We need one more method, public attribute, not void, public attribute get. This is going to take in a string name. So we're going to say return attributes, and we're going to be using a little link here. So just up top to using system.link. So back to our get method. Return attributes dot first or default, and we're gonna say attribute, and then you're gonna do an equal and then a greater than sign. Attribute dot name is equal to the name we passed in. So equal, my bad. So what this is doing is it's saying, loop through all our attributes until you find an attribute that matches the name we put in here. If you don't, then just return the default value of attribute, which is going to be null. It's the same thing as doing this over here. So same thing as doing for each attribute, if attribute dot name is equal to name, then return attribute, otherwise return null. That's the same thing. So these two are the same methods. Basically, this is just much shorter and it's more hidden, which is fine for at least if you understand the code. If you do not, then maybe you want to do the other method. It's all up to you. Last thing we need to do is just implement this iNumerator attribute getEnumerator over here. And this is simply going to be return attributes.getEnumerator. Basically, we're going to pretend to be this list. That's what we're doing here. This iEnumerable is going to basically pretend to be this list so we can iterate it without having to get this list, which is going to be really useful because, again, this is a private list. We don't want to have to get it everywhere. We don't want to. And we shouldn't because it's an accessibility problem and it's just unnecessary, right? So this is basically the attribute container here. Let's go into our player now, and it's actually going to be a mono behavior. So our player is going to have a few things. It's going to be a mono behavior, okay, and it's also going to be requiring a component called, and that's going to be the type of player controller here. This is basically so we are sure that we have a player controller because the player is basically contains all components, everything that a player should need, right? So we're gonna make this a singleton. So make it a public static current, public static player current here, okay? And just make that a get private set. Basically, what we're gonna be doing here is we need to access our player in the whole program. So what we're doing here is we're going to make a static player variable, and then we're going to initialize that in our onEnable method. So onEnable is it's a trigger for whenever the component's enabled. So whenever our player is enabled, we're just going to say current is equal to this. So our current instance of our player is the global instance for the player. That's basically what we're doing. This is a global instance. Global player instance, okay? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make two methods. First, we're going to need to have an attribute container, and I'm just going to call this attributes. That's going to be that's just going to get, and that's going to return a private attributes. So we should have done that first actually. Just make a private attribute container attributes and initialize that. So the reason we're having a private and public and not just making a get private set is because we're actually gonna have to make this attributes private variable serialized field so we can actually modify it in our inspector. It's a little quirk of Unity, but it's fine. Oh, oopsies. The next method or variable we're gonna make is a player controller. So we just want to store our player controller. It's just public player controller get private set. So this one can be a get private set because obviously we don't need to modify it in the inspector. And we're just going to set our controller to get component player controller. And we don't need to check if the object actually has a component of player controller because we're requiring it. So you have no choice to put it on. Last thing we want to do is actually call attributes.initialize here, just to make sure that all our attributes are initialized, and eventually this initialize method is going to do more here. This one is going to do more than just setting value to maximum value. We're also going to have an update method here, and this is going to be just to test out our attributes. So just do if input.getKeyDown keycode.keypad plus, was it? Yeah. So then we want to do attributes.getHealth.modify, and we're just gonna give it 25, and then just copy this, and we'll do that for minus as well so we can subtract. And then we'll do negative 25. Alright, so this is basically it for our core attribute system. the last thing we need to do here is make the UI. So I'm just gonna make a new folder here in our scripts. Folder UI. Oh, yeah, folder UI. And I'm gonna make a new method, or not new method, new script called attribute bar. So what this is gonna do is this is gonna manage all our attribute bars, but we can't do this yet. So let's just leave this to the side. Let's go back into the Unity editor, and we need to do one more thing. We need to actually make our attribute bars here. So in the UI panel, or I guess set menu of the create menu, create a new slider. We're gonna call this health bar. Okay. Also in the canvas, go to click on the canvas, go to canvas scaler, and the scale mode should be set to scale with screen size. Okay, so now that we have that, in our health bar, we need to set the anchor to the top left. So just do Alt Shift and then click the top left. Alt Shift also moves it, so Alt sets the position and Shift sets the pivot. And we want to set all of them, so Alt Shift is what we do. Okay, so over here, why are we using a slider for a health bar? It's because Unity actually doesn't have any progress bars or health bars or stuff like that. So a slider works really well because the first thing is it can be moved, right? You can see it can be moved like this and it fills up. So we just need to get rid of this handle and then expand it a little bit. That's really all a progress bar is after all. But before we do that, in our slider component over here, so just the root of it, we don't want it to be interactable, because if it's interactable, for instance right now, we can actually move it, but we don't want to move it. So just not interactable. And then also the transition should not be color changed, it should just be none. Now we're ready to actually modify this. So for the first thing we can remove is the handle slide area, because it's just the area where you can click to move the slider, but we don't really need that. Also, in our fill area, we want to press Alt Shift and then set the anchor to fill all. Same with background. And same with the fill. So just every game object under it should have that setting. Now I'm just going to go into the value and change it to 1/2, so it's half. So we can see it. And now I'm going to change the color of the fill to be a nice red. Not a full like red, just a kind of paler red. That's good. Last thing we will do is just add a text object, so UI text. We will, actually the anchor's fine, just let's align it on the center on both vertical and horizontal. 50/50. Just a placeholder text there, and then I'll make the font size 10. The last thing we need to do with this, and I've set the color to white as well, we need to import a new package called Unity UI extensions here. So these people have made a really nice, or this person I guess, has made a really nice just package of Unity UI extensions. It has things like outlines and everything. And the reason we're going to use this, and the reason we're not using the default Unity outline, is because it really generates this weird artifact. So you'll notice now, we go into here, it's like this outline is really weird. Now, the guy who made this Unity UI extensions has fixed this problem, or he has his own outline which doesn't create this problem, so we're going to use that. So just download that package quickly. And so you have to just go into source here. So just go to this link, bitbucket.org, Unity UI extensions. Then go to source. Actually, no, go to download. Download repository. Then you're going to open up that zip file. And just grab this Unity package. And we will just, I'm going to move it just into my desktop quickly. So just use it, and then just double click it and it'll import. Okay, I'll just import all of that. There's gonna be one thing we need to do though when we import it in. Yeah, just click I made a backup, let it import quickly. Okay, so there's one thing we need to do. First is we need to move it into our third-party folder, because it is a third-party extension, has no business in being in the root, it's going to be a third party. So I'm going to move it into the third-party folder. The next thing I'm going to do is you're going to see an error here. Well, just double-click and go into that file where the error was. And you'll notice that it says, don't save field is not an attribute. Well, the problem is we have made our own class called attribute. So it thinks this class, don't save field, it's in... not sure even where it is. We can find it. Don't save field. There it is. Okay, so it's in the folder UI extensions. Right, just whatever. Just search for it. You'll find it. The problem is it thinks that we're actually inheriting from this attribute, our scriptable object attribute. Well, we actually want to inherit from system.attribute. And that problem should go away. So just go and don't save field and make it inherit from system.attribute. Okay, so now the problem is solved. So we're good to go. I'll just collapse all that. And I'll close this stuff. So now we can go into our text here and add a nicer outline. I'm just gonna set the opacity here to 140. And now we can duplicate this health bar. Call it a mana bar here. Change the fill background color to be like some sort of blue, a nice blue. That'll work. Good, that's it. Now, last thing we need to do is we need to create an empty. Just call it stat bars or something. Even maybe HUD, whatever. And add a vertical layout group. So now we're gonna take our two bars here. And since our bar individually is 160 on the width, our stat bar is gonna have 160 width, okay? And our stat bar is 20 on the height. Our stat bar is gonna be 40 on the height. That way, it lays it out like that. And then just set the anchor to the top left. Last thing we need to do is just add a padding of 5 on both the top and bottom. And then you'll notice that the size it's kind of overflowing. That's pretty simple to fix. Just make the width 165 and the height 145 to account for the padding. And you're good to go. So there are our two bars. Now we can go back to our attribute bar script here. It will be a mono behavior. It will have both a start and an update. And the first thing it's gonna have is gonna require a component of type slider, okay? Not a slider joint, slider. So you're gonna need to import unityengine.ui at the top for that. We're gonna have a few things. So we're gonna have a serialized field, private string, attribute name. We're also gonna have a serialized field, private text object. We're also this is not gonna be a serialized field, it's just gonna be a private variable, private slider. So in our start method, we're gonna say slider is equal to get component slider. And then we're gonna get our attribute. So just make a new variable called attribute, and then we're gonna do player.current.attributes.get attribute name. So now, if our attribute is null, then we're gonna return out of our method because we've done everything that we need without the attribute being null, or with the attribute being null. But now, if our attribute is not null, and that's what we want, ideally, then we're gonna make a new method. Yeah, let's do that first. So let's make a new method. Private void on value changed. This is gonna have object sender, and it's gonna have an attribute event args. So it's gonna match the signature of our delegate. Then we're gonna say attribute dot value changed is plus equal to on value changed. So we're subscribing to this delegate. So whenever this is called, so whenever we called the where was it? Where's our attribute? Here it is. Whenever we called value changed here, it's inherently going to be calling on value changed over here. And we also don't need our update, actually. So now the last thing we need to do is we need to force our attribute to kind of call this the first time. And we can either just do onValueChanged here, pass it just anything, and then pass it the attribute, or a new event args attribute, or we could call attribute.modify 0. This is kind of like a hacky way though, so we're not going to do that. We'll leave it with this one, and this is kind of force trigger our onValueChanged, or our value changed event, so it can update the UI for the first time. Okay, so now in our onValueChanged, we're first going to check if our text is not equal, if our text is null, then just get out of there, since there's not much we will do. We want our text to not be null. Next, we want to say text.text is equal to string.format, and we're gonna do curly brace 0, curly brace, over curly brace 1, over curly brace, and then we're gonna pass it in our args.attribute dot value, and then our args.attribute dot maximum value. So this is going to basically display it in that sense. So 0 is going to be replaced with this, 1 is going to be replaced with the maximum value. The next thing we'll do is to set our slider value to be args.attribute.value over, so divided by, and we're going to cast our maximum value to a float. Because otherwise, if we don't, then this value is only going to be 0 or 1, because it's going to be an integer. It's going to be a loss of fraction. So we want to convert either one of these to floats, since int over float will result in a float. So we only need to cast it to 1, and I'll do it on the maximum value. That's it. So now we need to go into our bars here, and we need to add that component. So our attribute name is going to be health here, and the text is going to be that one. And then go in our mana bar, add this attribute bar as well. The text is going to be there, and the mana is going to be mana, or the attribute name is going to be mana. So the last thing is we need to go into our player, and we need to add that player script. In attributes, we need to add 2 elements, and in data, let's just duplicate this health attribute, rename it to mana attribute, and just call it mana. We can leave it at 0 minimum and 100 maximum. Now just drag in your health and your mana attributes, and now we can maximize on play, and you'll see that it starts off at 100, but now that I press minus on our health, it goes to 75, and I keep going down, and there you go. And now if I try to press minus again and again and again, it's not going to go down because, well, we capped it. If I, for instance, went into here and said, oh, maybe we should have 500 health, mana will still stay at 100, but we should have 500 health. Well, now you'll see it's 500 out of 500, and we can keep going down. And that's that. So there is our simple health and mana system, or attribute system. Next tutorial, we're going to talk about regenerating mana and then doing animated bars and stuff like that. So right now, this is a very simple system, and I mean, eventually, if we do end up implementing more stats like intelligence and dexterity, we'll have to expand it. But it's a pretty nice system. It's expandable because you don't need to do much. You could even write a script that generates these game objects dynamically, so you don't even have to set them up like this. You just give it a prefab and like a color for whatever attribute. But to me, that's just a little too much work for what it's worth. I don't think it's that much work to set up another, just duplicate this, change the color, and rename it. So, do it how you will, but this is how we're going to keep the tutorial. I'm trying to go for really simple as well. I don't want to overcomplicate it. Anyways, guys, this has been a long tutorial. But yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back next time. Bye-bye.